Let's talk about the murky world of boxing in the 1940s, 1950s under this gangster, Frankie Carbo, the czar of boxing. He was born Paul Gianfranco Carbo in New York's Lower East Side. By the way, he went through most of his criminal career as Paul Carbo. He became Frankie. I think he tossed that name up so he could get reporters and investigators off the track by having two different names. But anyway, he was a one-time member of Murder Inc. He operated as a boxing promoter, although he never had a license. He was a fight fixer. He fixed fights for gamblers and gave them inside information. He was an extortionist, that sort of thing. The FBI says he was a made member of the Lucchese crime family. I don't know. I couldn't find anything to substantiate that. It wasn't mentioned anywhere else. In 1915, he was 11 years old. I don't know what crime it was, but he was sent to what I can only tell you was the hellish New York State Reformatory upstate for juvenile boys. Uh, he got out, and then in 1920, he was 15. He was arrested in the Bronx. He robbed this young girl named Marian Lowenthal. She was a clerk, a bookkeeper for a messenger company. She was walking over to the firm's other building with 272 bucks in pay envelopes. Carbo had once worked there as an office boy. He was hiding. She came out. He punched her in the face, grabbed the money. The girl screamed, and Carbo ran. But this guy, a shipping clerk, Charlie Pato, chased him down, grabbed him, and held him for the cops. So over the next decade, Carbo racked up just this huge slew of arrests, including the murder of an otherwise innocent immigrant cab driver. He just refused to pay protection money to Carbo. So Carbo killed him. Carbo said it was self-defense, and he muckied up the works enough where the prosecution just accepted a reduced charge. He got 20 months for cold-blooded murder. After his release, prohibition had started. He wanted to make his money. He hired himself out as a rented gun. He was a thug. He took part in the 1931 murder. This is a very splashy murder at the time of this Philadelphia mobster named Mickey Duffy in Atlantic City. Carbo was charged, but of course he was eventually released on that charge. Duffy, he was an odd but interesting guy. He was born William Michael Kuzik. He was a Polish American. He is portrayed in the HBO series Empire Boardwalk or something. The guy, whoever it was that portrayed him, really did a wonderful job because he was just a weird guy. He was a bootleg power in the Philadelphia, Camden, South Jersey area. He was violent. He was quirky. He was extremely wealthy. One time he walked into a police station and they asked him what he wanted. He said, "I just want to see what the competition's doing." Anyway, so he was wealthy. He's been shot innumerable times before finally Carbo got him at the Ambassador Hotel in Atlantic City on August 31, 1931. Then he began to work for Murder Inc., and he was involved in a very splashy murder of these two bootleggers, Max Greenberg and Max Haskell. They held him for 6 months on that one, but the witness forgot everything, and so they had to drop the case. Greenberg and Haskell were in a hotel where they had an office and they lived because there was a war going on between them and some other groups. And I don't know how Carbo got in there because the papers reported there were four bodyguards, but he did get in. Greenberg had been with a girl he kept, and they were a young girl, 16, prostitute. He kept it. They walked out of there, and he gunned him down in a hallway. But anyway, he walked away from that one anyway. This Gambino soldier, Joe Stasi, he later said that the murders were ordered by Meyer Lansky, Abe Zwillman, Joe Adonis. They wanted control over that bootlegging business in northern New Jersey. Carbo, in 1940, began the decade with 17 arrests, five for murder, including 1939 slaughter of a police informant named Harry Big Greenberg, Big Greenie Greenberg. Greenberg was shaking down Buckhalter, the guy who ran murder, to keep his silence about various dealings he was involved in. That was a big mistake. Greenberg, who had been a friend, childhood friend of Bugsy Siegel, was murdered by Siegel, Whitey Krakow, and Frankie Carbo. It was Carbo who did the actual shooting. He shot Greenberg in the head 5 times, then left him in the driveway for his wife to find. He almost went to jail on that one because Murder Inc. members Abe Rellis and Allie Tannenbaum were going to testify against him, And then, of course, Relis got tossed out a window at the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island, and the case fell apart. During the 1940s, late 40s, Carbo turned into this big dollar, big name boxing promoter, fight fixer guy, and he dropped the more violent stuff. Carbo was popular with show business crowd. He was instrumental in touting Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, Martin and Lewis, when they were a young team. He got him involved with Angel Lopez, who ran the Havana Madrid Club in a Broadway. It was a really popular place at the time. So he got Martin and Lewis booked at the place. In turn, Lopez, who, by the way, was very, very, very close to Carbo on a whole different level, introduced Carbo to a Cuban fighter named Kid Galvin. They renamed him Kid Galvin. Uh, Carbo arranged top-notch fights for this former dishwasher. He pushed him up the ranks in the welterweight division before losing a decision to the great Sugar Ray Robinson, who was champ at the time, in 1948. And then in 1949, the one in 49 was for a championship fight. So Robinson, as you know, eventually lost to Jake LaMotta in February 1951. He didn't lose a title, but he lost the fight, and he just figured the hell with it. And so Gavlin won the vacant welterweight title by defeating Johnny Bratton. Bratton, well, we'll go into that later, but he was also involved with Carbo in a 15-round decision on May 18th, 1951. When Carbo was subpoenaed, that whole fight, by the way, was really questionable. Not to take away from Gavlin, he was a great, great fighter, by the way, Kid Gavlin, great fighter, who had a very tragic life afterwards. They took all his money, and he was crazy, spending ridiculously. He'd go out with a girl and buy her a car, that sort of thing. And he died broke, and it was just a terrible, terrible end of his life. But anyway, Carbo got subpoenaed before Kefauver. He sat down. He congratulated Kefauver on his recent re-election to office, and then he just flatly refused to answer any questions at all. However, Truman Gibson, what a good name, who was the secretary and later president of the International Boxing Commission, the IBC, swore testimony that Carbo controlled more than 23 fight managers as frontmen because he couldn't get a license because he had a criminal conviction. You can't get a license in New York with a felony conviction. When they asked Gibson, well, why did you take steps to block Carbo? He explained that Carbo's influence was great in the boxing world, and it would have been impractical for the IBC to have operated without what he called Carbo's goodwill. In exchange, Gibson added, the IBC paid Carbo's wife, Viola, $40,000 over a period of 3 years. That was a pretty good sum of money in 1952. Well, that would have been what, 47, 48, 49, 10 grand, 12 grand a year. That was a nice paycheck. He said that they gave her money under her maiden name because, quote, it looked better on our records. Yeah. Well, anyway, Gibson said that Carbo operated in the background. He said that Carbo used dozens of aliases. Gibson said that when, quote, a promoter spoke to a manager of Mr. Gray, or the man, or the uncle, or the ambassador, or our southern cousin, or the traveling salesman, it was understood that Frankie Carbo was being discussed. There was this New York police detective, Anthony Bernhardt. That investigator, he went undercover. There was a dinner one night at Goldie Ahern's restaurant, and Carbo was the center of attention. Carbo was in great spirits, he said. He was surrounded by Blinky Palermo, Baltimore promoter, Benny Trotta, who had a criminal record, Billy Brown, then the IBC matchmaker, Anthony Frenta, manager of a middleweight contender named Joey Giardello, and Miami manager and promoter Angelo Dundee. I remember Angelo Dundee. He had tied in with Ali, I thought. Anyway, Carbo never let anybody in the group knew anything about him all at one time. So at one point he started a conversation with Billy Brown, and then he pulled Brown away from the table in front of everyone and finished the discussion in private. That was how he conducted himself. At another point, when the discussion of another fight came up, Carbo told everyone at the table that a certain manager, quote, got greedy and took 1,000, but I called Charlie Black, and that got straightened out. Once during the evening, he directed Palermo to call a certain number in Houston, Texas. So Palermo, he shouted the number to him and told him to ask for Mr. Frank. The detective memorized the number and he traced it later on to a fight promoter in Texas, Lou Viscua. Palermo made the call and then reported back to Carbo. He shouted across the room, "I told him to send up $2,000 right away." Detective Bernhardt later testified that in Chicago, Carbo's partner was Bernard Glickman, who came to a sad end. He had to go into hiding, and said that when the boxers started, when boxers started to perform well, Carbo or Glickman would go up to them, turning up, he said, like a lost penny, so they'd get him to go on in their stable. For the most part, Glickman later testified that he met Carbo in Jack Dempsey's New York restaurant, but he never knew what Carbo did for a living. Quote, he knew a lot about fighting, but wouldn't have the slightest idea what he does for a living. Oy, oy, oy. So actually, Carbo and Glickman were partners in the management of this fighter, good fighter, Johnny Baxton. During the late 1950s, the law, people just had enough. Carbo was everywhere, and he just didn't seem to care who knew that he was mobbed up and he was fixing fights. So the law, is always the case, closed in on him. They locked him up in Rikers Island, a horrible place, for managing boxers without a license. As I said, he couldn't get a license because he was a criminal. So he ran a lot of that through Blinky Palermo. He was released in 1960, and he got subpoenaed to appear before the McClellan Committee. They asked him about the boxing game, but it was pointless, of course. He took the fifth 25 times. The next year, the government charged him and Palermo with, and others, with extorting this NBA welterweight champion, Don Jordan. Carbo, Palermo, LA boss Jack Dragna, and porn producer out of LA, Joe Sika, tried to muscle in on Jordan's contract with a fight manager named Don Neeseth. He also threatened the Hollywood fight promoter Jack Leonard. And those guys weren't afraid of him, so they went to court and said he threatened us. And Carbo was locked up during the trial, so he appealed to U.S. Supreme Court for a bail pending the appeal, but the court denied the plea, and they kept him in the L.A. County Jail. Justice William O. Douglas, in his lengthy opinion, said, "There is substantial probability of danger to witnesses should this applicant be granted bail." Wow. The trial lasted 3 months. then U.S. Attorney Robert Kennedy served as his prosecutor. And it ended with Carbo being sentenced to 25 years in prison. In 1962, the IRS placed a $1 million judgment on all of his assets for non-payment of back taxes for the years 1944, 45, 46, 49, 50, 51, and 52. Here's an example. In 1945 alone, Carbo deposited, and they had proof of this, $500,000 into his personal bank account, and then he claimed on the taxes that year that he made less than $30,000, and of the $30,000, only $20,000 was taxable. I don't know how he came to that conclusion. Anyway, he did a lot of time. He was finally granted a mercy parole due to poor health, and he died in Miami Beach in Florida on November 9, 1976. The character Tommy Como in the film Raging Bull was basically based on Carbo.
Hey,
Thanks for the drink.
how are you? How you doing, Joey? How's everything?
Hi.
Where's Jake?
He's over there. You don't want to come.
What do you think of that thing, right?
Call him. If you call him, he'll come.
All right, I'll be right back.
Here he comes.
What is it? You don't call anybody anymore? We never see you anymore? Crying out loud. You never come around anymore? You can't even make a call? What is it?
Oh, I'm busy. I'm going away fighting. I'm busy.
Busy. Look at him taking me seriously. I'm only kidding you. What a fucking kid. That's the best fucking fighter around. Oh, the Moulignons, forget about it. They're all afraid to fight you. How you feeling, all right?
I'm all right. Yeah.
Good, strong. Huh.
Strong, yeah, I'm doing.
Then Gennaro's got to watch his ass, right?
I think you should.
Last 3-4 times I won nothing but money with the guy.
Oh, he's no piece of cake. That's a good fighter.
Very attractive guy. All the girls like him. No marks. Clean.
Jake, am I wrong? Did you gain a few pounds?
Yeah, a few pounds. I knock it off right away. No problem.
Right away.
Right away.
Well, look, let me ask you something. Huh? I'm just talking. I come to you and I'm telling you that I'm bet a lot of money on you that this fight gets you narrow, right?
Yeah.
Well, what would you tell me? What could you say to me?
I would say bet everything you got.
Everything.
Everything. Because I'm gonna open his hole like this. Excuse my French, you know. I'm gonna make him suffer. I'm gonna make his mother wish she never had him.
Do something
Make him into
personal?
dog meat. What?
Did he say something in the paper?
Oh, he's a nice kid. He's a pretty kid, too. I mean, I don't know, I got a problem. I should fuck him a fight.
Fuck him, a fight.
You really